The gnawing emptiness in Isla's stomach was a familiar drumbeat, a rhythm of sacrifice she had learned to ignore. Her fingers, nimble and slightly trembling, worked with practiced efficiency, slicing the stale loaf of bread she'd managed to hide at the back of the pantry. Each slice was precious. The thin slivers of processed cheese and turkey were rationed with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, because in her world, they were just as volatile. One misplaced item, one receipt discovered in a pocket, and the explosion would be swift and brutal. She carefully wrapped each of the 12 sandwiches in cheap wax paper, her heart aching that it wasn't more. This paltry offering was her entire sustenance for the next 2 days, sacrificed for a hunger greater than her own. She tucked them into a worn canvas bag, pulled her long sleeves down to cover the faded yellow and purple bruises mapping her arms, and slipped out the back door of the gilded cage Dorian called home. The air outside was crisp, a promise of autumn that felt like freedom on her skin. She walked quickly, her head down, a ghost flitting through the pristine, manicured streets of the wealthy suburb. Every passing car sent a jolt of panic through her veins. Was it him? Had he noticed she was gone? Her destination was a world away from the sterile silence of Dorian's mansion. St. Jude's Orphanage stood on the frayed edge of the city, a proud, crumbling brick edifice that defied the encroaching luxury developments. It was her sanctuary, the one place her spirit could breathe. As she approached, the distant, guttural rumble of a motorcycle echoed down the street. It grew louder, a deep-throated growl that seemed to vibrate in her bones. A massive Harley-Davidson, all gleaming chrome and black steel, cruised past. The man riding it was a giant clad in leather, his face a landscape of hard lines and a formidable beard, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. A patch on his vest read, Hell's Angels. He didn't seem to look at her, but she felt his presence like a physical force. She hurried her steps, her fear momentarily shifting from Dorian to the intimidating stranger. The biker, whose road name was Grizz, slowed his machine to a near crawl. He was on a simple parts run for the clubhouse, a mundane task, but his eyes, honed by years of watching the world from the back of a bike, missed nothing. He saw the girl. She was too thin, her clothes a size too big, as if she were trying to disappear inside them. But it was the way she moved that caught him, a frantic, hunted energy, a constant scanning of her surroundings. He saw the flash of raw fear in her eyes as she glanced at him, but underneath it, he saw something else, a flicker of fierce, unbreakable will. He watched her slip through the rusted iron gates of the old orphanage, a place he'd passed 100 times without a second thought. He idled there for a moment, the engine a low thrum. A wisp of a girl, looking like a strong wind, could blow her away, carrying a bag that seemed too heavy for her, into a building that looked one storm away from collapse. Something about the scene was wrong. It was a discordant note in the day's rhythm, and Grizz had learned long ago to pay attention to those. He twisted the throttle, the engine roaring back to life, and continued on his way, but the image of the scared girl and the crumbling brick house was already burned into his mind. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he'd be telling his club president, Rook, about this. Isla pushed open the heavy oak door of St. Jude's, and the scent of lemon polish, old books, and simmering vegetable soup enveloped her like a warm hug. The sounds of children's laughter echoed from the common room, a melody that instantly soothed the frayed edges of her nerves. Sister Agnes, a woman whose face was a roadmap of kindness and worry, met her at the door. Isla, my dear, you shouldn't have. Her eyes fell to the canvas bag. You need to eat. Isla managed a weak smile, pushing the bag into the nun's hands. They need it more. Is a good day. Sister Agnes's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Every day you visit is a good day. But we have news before she could elaborate. A dozen small bodies swarmed Isla, tugging on her worn sweater, their bright, hopeful faces a balm to her soul. For the next hour, she was not Dorian's prisoner. She was just Isla, the storyteller, the game player, the one who listened to their dreams. She forgot the ache in her belly as she watched them devour the sandwiches with a joyous hunger that filled her more than any meal could. The joy was a fragile bubble. When she returned to the silent, opulent prison Dorian had built for her, she found him waiting in the grand foyer. He was standing by the marble staircase, a single piece of paper held between his thumb and forefinger. A grocery receipt. Her blood ran cold. Out for a stroll, were we? His voice was deceptively soft, a silken thread that could turn into a garrote in a heartbeat. Dorian was a monster cloaked in a bespoke suit, his handsome face a mask for the cruelty that lived behind his eyes. I needed some air, she stammered, her gaze fixed on the floor. And bread? Cheese? Turkey? For a woman who claims to have no appetite, you seem to be preparing for a feast. He closed the distance between them, his cologne, a scent she once loved, now thick with menace. He held the receipt up to her face. Who were you feeding, Isla? Tell me no one. It was for me. For later, the lie was flimsy, pathetic. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Don't lie to me. It's insulting. His hand shot out, grabbing her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth. You are mine. What you eat, where you go, who you see, it is all decided by me. You seem to have forgotten the rules. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling back. Perhaps a reminder is in order. He gestured grandly toward the large window, overlooking the expansive grounds. I have some news, too. I've just closed a deal. A beautiful piece of waterfront property. Old, dilapidated, an eyesore, really. Perfect for a new luxury high-rise. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It's called St. Jude's. The foreclosure was finalized this morning. Demolition begins at dawn, the day after tomorrow. And you, my dear, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper, will have a front row seat. You'll watch them tear down your little secret. You'll watch them scatter your little charity case to the winds. And you will learn that there is no world outside of me. Isla felt the floor drop out from under her. It wasn't just about her anymore. He was going to destroy the only light in her life, the only good she felt she could do in the world. He was going to make her watch. The weight of his cruelty was absolute, a crushing darkness that threatened to extinguish her completely. Back at the Hells Angels clubhouse, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, motor oil, and leather. Grizz found Rook in his office, a cramped room filled with maps, ledgers, and the ghosts of past battles. Rook was a man forged in fire, his charisma as potent as the authority he commanded. Tattoos snaked up his neck from beneath his leather cut, each one telling a story he rarely spoke of. He was listening to Grizz's report, his expression unreadable. A skinny girl in a rundown orphanage, Rook said, his voice a low gravel. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. The world's full of Grizz. We start chasing every sad story. We'll never get back on the road. This felt different, Rook, Grizz insisted, his earnestness cutting through the usual clubhouse banter. The look in her eyes, it was the same look I saw in my cousin's eyes before her old man put her in the hospital. And the place, it's on its last legs. She was bringing them food, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in a week herself. Rook went still. The mention of Grizz's cousin hit a nerve, a raw, exposed wire connected to his own history. He picked up a framed photo on his desk. It's back to the room. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. The image was of a young woman with a bright, defiant smile, a smile he hadn't seen in 20 years. A smile extinguished by a man who wore a suit and promised her the world, only to lock her in a cage of fear and violence. He had been too young, too powerless to stop it then. The guilt was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly faded. All right, he said, his voice tight. He placed the photo back down, turning it away again. We'll do a ride-by. You, me, and Socket. Tomorrow afternoon. Let's see what kind of different this is. The next day, 3 Harleys rumbled to a stop across the street from St. Jude's. The place looked even more pathetic in the harsh light of day. A chain-link fence sagged, the grass was overgrown, and the brickwork was crumbling. But through the grime, they could see signs of life. Children's drawings were taped to the inside of the windows. A brightly colored hopscotch grid was chalked on the cracked pavement. As they watched, a sleek black car pulled up and a man in a sharp suit got out. He moved with an arrogant swagger, hammering a large sold and pending demolition sign into the small patch of lawn. The sound of the hammer was like gunshots in the quiet afternoon. The orphanage door opened, and Isla rushed out, followed by Sister Agnes. Isla's face, which they could now see clearly, was a canvas of pure devastation. She confronted the man, her small frame trembling with a mixture of fury and despair. They couldn't hear the words, but her body language screamed defiance. The man just laughed, patted the sign, and drove away. Isla's shoulders slumped, and she wrapped her arms around the weeping nun. Rook watched the entire exchange, his hands clenching the grips of his motorcycle so tightly his knuckles turned white. He saw it all. The predator in the expensive suit, the crumbling sanctuary, and the girl fighting a battle she had no chance of winning. He saw his sister's ghost in Isla's defiant stance, in her protective embrace of the old woman. This wasn't just a sad story. This was a declaration of war. He turned to Grizz, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "This is our business now," he growled. "Grizz, I want light recon. Find out who that bastard in the suit is. I want his name, his business, his favorite brand of toothpaste." Everything Socket, the club's resident tech whiz, grinned. "Already on it, boss. Got his license plate. Give me an hour." The rumble of their engines as they pulled away was no longer a casual sound. It was a promise. The clubhouse transformed from a lounge into a war room. Socket, a wiry man with fingers that danced over a keyboard like a concert pianist, set up his laptops on the main bar. The license plate was the key that unlocked the first door. The car was registered to a shell corporation, which led to another and another. But Socket was relentless, peeling back the layers of legal misdirection like an onion. After 2 hours of furious typing and muttered curses, he leaned back, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Got him," he announced. "Dorian Vance. Real estate mogul on paper, but the whispers on the dark web say he's the money man for the Kuznetsov syndicate. He cleans their dirty cash through his development projects. He's untouchable. Cops are on his payroll, judges in his pocket. He's a ghost with a 9-figure bank account and a reputation for making problems disappear." Grizz slammed his fist on the table. "So he's not just a bully. He's a monster." Rook absorbed the information, his expression grim. This was bigger than a simple domestic dispute. Vance wasn't just an abuser. He was a kingpin hiding in plain sight. This made the extraction of Isla infinitely more complicated and dangerous. "What about the orphanage?" Rook asked. "It's prime real estate," Socket said, pulling up a satellite map. "Last independent property on that stretch of the waterfront. Vance has been trying to acquire it for years. Looks like he finally strong-armed his way into a foreclosure. The demolition permits were fast-tracked this morning. They're not wasting any time. While the Angels planned, Isla's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her bedroom. Dorian, enraged by her public display of defiance at the orphanage, had locked her in. He'd taken her phone, her laptop, even the books she used to escape. He wanted her completely isolated, marinating in her despair. "You need to be broken, Isla," he had whispered, his breath cold against her ear before he'd locked the door. "So I can build you back into something that understands its purpose." Fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in her chest. But beneath the fear, a tiny, defiant ember still glowed. She would not let him win. She would not let him destroy St. Jude's without a fight, even if it was her last. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a weapon, a tool, a chance. She found it in the bottom of her jewelry box, a small, sterling silver locket Dorian had given her in the early days, back when his poison was disguised as affection. It was worthless to her now, except for the tiny, folded piece of paper tucked inside, a note from her late grandmother, her handwriting a familiar comfort. An idea sparked. It was insane, a long shot, but it was better than suffocating in silence. She waited for the telltale sound of the daily grocery delivery truck, a service Dorian used so she wouldn't have to be seen in public. She heard its beep, beep, beep as it reversed into the long driveway. Peering through a sliver in the curtains, she saw the young driver, a kid who always looked nervous, unloading crates. This was her only chance. Her hands shaking, she took the precious note from her grandmother and turned it over. On the blank back, using a stub of an eyeliner pencil she'd hidden, she wrote 4 desperate words. Help. St. Jude's. Dorian Vance. She folded it into a tiny square. Then, she did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. She pried open the window, just a crack, the old wood groaning in protest. It was a 20-foot drop to the manicured bushes below. Taking a deep breath, she wrapped the note tightly around the locket, adding weight. The driver was heading back to his truck. It was now or never. With a flick of her wrist, she threw it. The small silver projectile arced through the air, glinting in the sun, and landed with a soft thud in an open crate of oranges on the truck's loading ramp. The driver, oblivious, closed the truck's rear door and drove away. Isla sank to the floor, her body trembling, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She had sent her message in a bottle out into a hostile sea. Now, all she could do was wait for a miracle or the tide. The delivery driver, a young man named Kevin, found the locket when he was unloading at his next stop, a high-end restaurant. He almost tossed it aside, thinking it was a piece of trash, but the glint of silver caught his eye. He picked it up and saw the note wrapped around it. His first instinct was to ignore it. Getting involved with people like Dorian Vance was a death wish. Kevin had heard the stories from other drivers. Vance was a dangerous man. He could lose his job, or worse. He held the tiny, folded paper in his hand, its weight feeling immense. He thought about the scared-looking woman he sometimes saw in the upstairs window of that house, a flicker of movement behind the pristine glass. He thought about the name St. Jude's, the old, sad-looking orphanage on the edge of town. His conscience warred with his fear. He could throw it away, and no one would ever know. But the word help was written with such desperate force that the pencil had nearly torn the paper. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't go to the cops. Vance owned the cops. So, he went to the only other power in the city he knew of that wasn't afraid of anything. His shift over, Kevin drove his beat-up sedan not home, but to the industrial park on the other side of the tracks. He parked a block away from the Hells Angels clubhouse, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He walked up to the fortified steel door, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. A mountain of a man with a prospect patch answered his knock. "What do you want?" the prospect growled. Kevin, trembling, held out the note. This came from Dorian Vance's house. "The woman. She needs help." The prospect snatched the note, gave Kevin a long, hard look, and slammed the door. Kevin stood there for a moment, then scurried back to his car, feeling as if he'd just handed a lit stick of dynamite to a god. The note traveled from the prospect's hand to Grizz's, and finally to Rook's. Rook unfolded the tiny square of paper under the dim light of his office lamp. "Help. St. Jude's. Dorian Vance," 4 words. A confirmation. A plea. A catalyst. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't just recon anymore. This was a rescue. Rook strode out of his office and into the main hall of the clubhouse. He climbed onto a table, his presence silencing the room instantly. "Church," he bellowed, the traditional call for a mandatory club meeting. The room filled as bikers poured in from the garage, the bar, the back rooms. Within minutes, over 100 members of his charter stood before him. "We have a situation," Rook began, his voice low and dangerous. He laid it all out. The monster, Dorian Vance. The stolen orphanage, St. Jude's. And the prisoner, Isla, who had risked everything to send a single word. Help. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told them Vance was connected, that this would be bloody, and that the law wouldn't be on their side. Then, he did something he rarely did. He let the mask slip. "Some of you know, I had a sister," he said, his voice thick with a pain that time had not healed. "She met a man like Vance. A man in a suit with a pretty smile and a black heart. He promised her the world and gave her a cage. I was too young, too stupid, too weak to stop him. By the time I was strong enough, it was too late. The room was dead silent. Every man there knew the sanctity of that kind of confession. We have a code in this club, Rook continued, his voice regaining its steel. We protect our own. But sometimes, our own are the ones who can't ask for help. The ones who are beaten down, silenced, and forgotten. This woman, Isla, she's one of ours now. That orphanage, those kids, they're ours to protect. Vance wants to tear it down at dawn, the day after tomorrow. He wants to crush the last bit of hope that woman has. We are not going to let that happen. He looked out at the sea of hard faces. I'm not ordering you. I'm asking you. Will you ride with me? For a moment, there was silence. Then one biker slammed his fist on a table. Another followed. Soon the entire room was a thunderous roar of fists on wood, a chorus of guttural shouts. It was their oath. Rook nodded once, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Grizz, get on the horn. Call every charter president from here to the coast. Tell them the Sentinels are calling in a favor. Tell them we ride for the innocent. The call to arms have been sounded. The message spread like wildfire through the unseen channels of the biker world. It wasn't just a phone call. It was a summons, a sacred obligation. Chapter presidents from 3 states listened to the story passed down the line. The predator, the prisoner, the orphans. They heard the echo of Rook's personal pain in the request, and they answered without hesitation. The gathering began subtly. First, a dozen bikes from a neighboring city, their engines a low rumble as they pulled into the clubhouse yard late that night. Then, a wave of 30 more from a Chapter 2 states over, riding in tight formation. By the next afternoon, the industrial park was transformed. It was a sea of iron and steel, a living, breathing encampment of leather and chrome. Harleys of every description, Dynas, Softails, Road Kings, were parked in meticulous rows, their polished metal gleaming under the sun. The number swelled past 200, then 3, then 4. Men who were legends in their own territories, men with road names like Reaper, Sledge, and Preacher, stood shoulder to shoulder with Rook's charter. The final count, as the sun began to set on the eve of the demolition, was 520. A legion. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere was electric. Rook, Grizz, Socket, and the visiting chapter presidents stood around a large table covered with satellite maps of Dorian Vance's estate and the St. Jude's property. This was no chaotic mob. This was a meticulously planned military operation. Vance is arrogant, Rook stated, his finger tracing a line on the map. He believes he's untouchable. He'll have his own security there, probably ex-military mercs, but he'll be expecting to intimidate a bunch of nuns and children, not us. We used that arrogance against him. He outlined the plan, his voice clear and commanding. Phase 1, extraction. It happens tonight, 0200 hours. A small team, led by Grizz. You're going in quiet. No confrontation. Get the girl, get out. Socket, you'll be on comms, disabling their security feeds. Grizz nodded, his face set in grim determination. Phase 2, the shield. At 0500, as the demolition crews start to mobilize, the main force, all 500 of us, will move. We ride to St. Jude's. We form a perimeter, a living wall. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. No violence, unless provoked. We are a shield. We let them see what they're up against, and Phase 3, ask the president of the Nomad Charter, a man known as Preacher. Phase 3, Rook said, his eyes glinting, is the confrontation. Once Isla is safe and the orphanage is secure, Vance will show up. He won't be able to resist. And when he does, he'll deal with me. Meanwhile, in her gilded prison, Isla had lost all track of time. The sun had set, and the darkness in her room was absolute. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket. Her desperate ploy with the locket felt foolish now, a child's wish cast into a storm. She could hear Dorian downstairs, entertaining guests. The sound of their laughter, their clinking glasses, was a form of torture. He was celebrating his victory, celebrating the destruction of her hope. She curled into a ball on the floor, her body aching from hunger and tension. Dawn was coming. The bulldozers were coming. She closed her eyes, praying not for rescue, but for a swift end. The rumble she heard first was so faint she thought she was imagining it, a phantom echo of the bike she'd seen days ago. But it grew a deep, earth-shaking thunder that wasn't from a single engine, but from hundreds. It was the sound of an approaching storm, a wave of raw power rolling through the sleeping suburbs. It was the sound of the gathering. At precisely 0200 hours, under the sliver of a waning moon, a black panel van with no markings killed its engine a quarter-mile from the Vance estate. 6 figures, clad in black from head to toe, disembarked and melted into the shadows of the sprawling, wooded property line. Grizz led the team, his night vision goggles casting the world in an eerie green glow. In the van, Socket's fingers flew across 3 keyboards, his face illuminated by the monitors. Perimeter alarm loop is active. They're blind, he whispered into his headset. You have a 2-minute window to cross the south lawn. Go. The team moved with the silent, fluid grace of predators. They scaled the 10-foot perimeter wall, dropping onto the perfectly manicured grass without a sound. They were ghosts in Dorian's fortress. Cameras 1 through 4 are down. Socket's voice crackled in their ears. You're clear to the west terrace, Grizz signaled to his men. 2 peeled off to stand guard, their shapes indistinguishable from the ornamental statues dotting the garden. Grizz and the other 3 reached the French doors of the library. The lock was a high-tech magnetic one, but the angel with him, a former safecracker named Fingers, had it bypassed in under 30 seconds with a custom-made device. They slipped inside. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the loud ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. It smelled of money and decay. He's in the master's suite, East Wing, Socket relayed, tracking the heat signatures. The girl's room is upstairs, northwest corner. 2 of Vance's personal guards are stationed at the bottom of the main staircase. Grizz motioned for 2 of his men to handle the guards. They moved down the hallway, silent as wraiths. A moment later, 2 soft thuds echoed, barely audible. Staircase is clear, came the whisper over the comms. Grizz took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. He found the room Socket had indicated. The door was solid oak, with a heavy deadbolt. No time for picking it. He planted his feet, and with a single, explosive kick, splintered the door frame. Isla, who had been drifting in a half-conscious state of despair, scrambled into the corner, a scream catching in her throat. The massive, dark figure filling the doorway was the stuff of nightmares. But then he raised a hand, pulling off his goggles and balaclava. It was the man from the motorcycle. Isla, he whispered, his voice surprisingly gentle. We got the note. Rook sent us. You're safe now. Disbelief warred with a tidal wave of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. She couldn't speak, only nod. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded again, her legs feeling like jelly. He helped her to her feet, his grip on her arm firm and steady. As they moved back into the hall, a shout came from the east wing. Dorian was awake. No time for quiet. Grizz grunted into his comms. We're loud. Meet at the exfil point. Go! They half ran, half stumbled down the stairs, past the unconscious forms of the guards. Alarms began to shriek throughout the house. Lights flashed on. They burst out onto the terrace, just as the first of Dorian's alerted security team rounded the corner of the house. One of Grizz's men laid down, covering fire with a silenced weapon, the rounds thudding into the stone pillars, forcing the guards back. They sprinted across the lawn, the wet grass soaking their feet, and piled into the waiting van. The engine roared to life, and the van tore away into the night, leaving the screaming alarms and flashing lights of Dorian Vance's prison behind them. Isla huddled in the back of the van, wrapped in a heavy blanket someone had given her. The man named Grizz sat beside her, a silent, reassuring presence. She was out. She was free. The first phase was complete. As the van carrying Isla sped toward a secure, safe house on the other side of the city, the second phase of Rook's plan was already in motion. At precisely 0445 hours, a low, guttural rumble began to echo through the pre-dawn stillness. It started as a whisper, then grew into a ground-shaking roar that vibrated through the very foundations of the city. From the industrial park, a river of steel and fire began to flow. 520 motorcycles, their headlights, cutting through the darkness like a legion of angry eyes, moved as one. They rode in perfect, staggered formation, a disciplined army taking over the empty streets. The procession was miles long, a terrifying and beautiful sight. They weren't joyriding. They were a force of nature, an unstoppable tide of righteous fury. At St. Jude's Orphanage, Sister Agnes had gathered the children in the small chapel. She knew the bulldozers were coming. She had spent the night praying for a miracle, but her faith was wearing thin. The older children were scared, huddled together, while the younger ones slept, blissfully unaware. Then she heard it, the thunder. It wasn't the clank and diesel groan of heavy machinery she had been dreading. This was different. It was deeper, more powerful, a sound that seemed to shake the stained glass windows in their frames. She went to the front door, her heart in her throat, expecting the worst. What she saw made her gasp, her hand fly in her mouth. Over the crest of the hill, they came. A wave of motorcycles flooding the landscape. They poured onto the property, their engines a deafening chorus. They didn't stop at the gate. They moved with purpose, forming a perfect, multi-layered ring around the entire orphanage building, their bikes positioned like an armored barricade. Then, as if commanded by a single, silent signal, all 520 engines cut out at once. The sudden, absolute silence was more intimidating than the noise had been. The bikers dismounted. They were giants in leather, a silent, unmoving wall of muscle and menace. They faced outward, their backs to the orphanage, their arms crossed. A living shield. Minutes later, the demolition crew arrived. A convoy of 5 massive bulldozers, 3 excavators, and a fleet of dump trucks, escorted by 2 black SUVs filled with Dorian Vance's private security team. The foreman, a burly man with a clipboard, saw the scene and his jaw dropped. His convoy ground to a halt 100 yards away. He got out of his truck, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. The thugs from the SUVs got out, armed with batons and a misplaced sense of authority. They were outnumbered more than 50 to 1. The foreman started shouting, his voice sounding small and pathetic in the vast, tense silence. "You people need to move. This is a legal demolition site. You're trespassing." Not a single biker moved. Not a single head turned. They were statues of defiance. The foreman's radio crackled. It was his boss. He explained the situation, his voice trembling slightly. The thugs tried to advance, posturing and yelling threats. A dozen of the largest angels, including Grizz, who had just arrived from the safe house, took a single, synchronized step forward. The thugs stopped dead in their tracks. The air crackled with unspoken violence. Frantic calls were being made to Dorian Vance, whose morning had already been ruined by a broken door and a missing possession. The sun began to rise, casting a golden glow on the scene, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the space between the helpless demolition crew and the immovable wall of bikers. The shield was in place. The sanctuary was secure, and the stage was set for the final act. Dorian Vance arrived in a screech of tires, his silver Aston Martin skidding to a halt just behind the stalled demolition crew. He burst out of the car, his face purple with rage. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. The mask of calm control had been utterly shattered. He was a cornered animal, and he was ready to bite. "What is the meaning of this?" he screamed, storming toward the silent line of bikers. "This is my property. I have a court order. I will have every single one of you filthy animals arrested for trespassing." He jabbed a finger at the impassive faces. "Move. Get off my land now." The line of bikers parted like the Red Sea, and Rook stepped through. He was calm, his presence a stark contrast to Dorian's frantic rage. He was flanked by Grizz and Preacher, their combined size and stillness creating an intimidating tableau. Rook stopped 10 feet from Dorian, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The juxtaposition was cinematic. The slick, enraged businessman in his $1,000 shoes standing on dusty ground opposite the leather-clad king of the outlaws. "This land doesn't belong to you, Vance," Rook said, his voice a low, even rumble that carried with absolute authority. "It belongs to the children you were about to make homeless." Dorian laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. Oh, this is about the orphans? You're a biker gang with a bleeding heart? How touching. It's a business transaction, you idiot. Now get out of my way before I have my men remove you. Your men? Rook glanced at the handful of thugs, who were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. They don't look too eager. Maybe it's because they know what we know. And what's that? Dorian sneered. Rook took a step forward. We know about the Kuznetsov syndicate. We know about the shell corporations. We know about the millions in dirty money you're washing through these developments, and Rook's voice dropped, becoming a blade of ice. We know about Isla. Dorian's face went pale. The name hit him like a physical blow. She's gone, Vance. Rook continued, pressing his advantage. She's safe. She's free. And she's ready to talk. To people who can't be bought. People who aren't on your payroll. The last vestiges of Dorian's composure crumbled. His mind raced. His empire, his freedom, it was all contingent on control and silence. Isla was the one person who could burn it all to the ground. He was ruined. Pure, primal fury took over. You filth, he shrieked, his hand darting inside his suit jacket. He pulled out a small, silver pistol. You've ruined everything. He raised the gun, his hand shaking, aiming it squarely at Rook's chest. The world seemed to slow down. But before his finger could even tighten on the trigger, the space between them exploded into motion. Grizz moved with the speed of a striking bear, his hand clamping down on Dorian's wrist, crushing the bones. The gun clattered to the ground. Simultaneously, a dozen other angels surged forward. Dorian's thugs, seeing their boss go down, made a fatal error in judgment. One lunged forward with a baton. He was met by a wall of fists and boots. The confrontation was brutally efficient. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dismantling. The bikers moved with practiced, disciplined violence, neutralizing Dorian's men without killing them, but leaving no doubt as to the outcome. Dorian himself was hauled to his feet, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle, a scream of pain and rage caught in his throat. He looked up into Rook's cold, merciless eyes. This isn't justice, Rook said quietly, his voice cutting through Dorian's whimpers. This is pest control. As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. But they weren't coming for the bikers. Socket's anonymous tip, complete with encrypted files detailing Vance's money laundering operations and a sworn statement from Isla being transcribed at that very moment, had been delivered to the one federal agency in the state that Vance couldn't touch. The sirens were for him. The king was dethroned. The monster was caged. The arrival of the federal agents was a swift, professional affair. They took one look at the scene, the 500 silent bikers, the neutralized security team, and the whimpering, broken Dorian Vance, and immediately understood they were walking into the end of a story, not the beginning. They cuffed Vance and his men, their charges read out in a flat, official tone. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy. The evidence Socket had provided was overwhelming, a digital mountain that would bury Vance for the rest of his life. As Dorian was forced into the back of a black SUV, his eyes met Rook's one last time. There was no defiance left in them, only the hollow emptiness of absolute defeat. The bikers didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply watched, their purpose fulfilled. Then one by one, they mounted their Harleys. The earth began to tremble again as 520 engines roared to life in unison. But this time, the sound wasn't a threat. It was a victory cry. They peeled away, not as a chaotic mob, but in the same disciplined formation they had arrived in, leaving the orphanage safe in the morning sun. A short time later, a quiet car pulled up. Isla stepped out. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, clothes provided by the women who ran the club's safe house. The bruises on her arms were still there, but she no longer tried to hide them. Her head was held high, her eyes clear and free of fear for the first time in years. Sister Agnes ran to her, and the two women embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The children poured out of the orphanage, swarming Isla in a joyous, chaotic hug. She sank to her knees, laughing, truly laughing, as she was buried under the affection she had fought so hard to protect. From a distance, parked on the hill overlooking the scene, Rook and Grizz watched. Rook didn't say a word, but a profound sense of peace settled over him. He saw Isla pick up a little girl and swing her around. He saw her radiant, unburdened smile. In that smile, he saw a ghost of his sisters, not as a painful memory, but as a redeemed promise. The guilt that had haunted him for 2 decades began to recede, replaced by the warm glow of justice delivered. "You did good, boss," Grizz said quietly, handing him a bottle of water. Rook took it, his eyes still on the scene below. "We did good, brother," he corrected. The story of the ride spread, becoming a legend whispered in bars and clubhouses across the country. But the angels' work wasn't done. They hadn't just saved St. Jude's, they had adopted it. The following weekend, they returned, not as warriors, but as builders. The electricians rewired the entire building. The plumbers installed new pipes and fixtures. The carpenters repaired the crumbling porch and patched the leaking roof. They painted the walls, planted a garden, and built a brand new playground. They set up a trust fund, seeded with anonymous donations from charters across the nation, ensuring St. Jude's would never be threatened again. Months later, the orphanage was reborn, vibrant and full of life. Isla was its new director, her innate kindness and fierce spirit guiding it into a new era. She was healing, her scars fading into a testament of her strength. One sunny afternoon, 2 Harleys rumbled up the newly paved driveway. Rook and Grizz dismounted. The children, who now associated the sound of a Harley with safety and fun, ran to greet them. Isla met them on the porch, a genuine, peaceful smile on her face. "Coffee's on," she said. They sat on the porch swing, watching the children play on the playground built by giants in leather. The rumble of their bikes was no longer a sound of menace in this town, but a lullaby of protection. Isla, a woman who had once skipped a meal to offer a small kindness, had, in turn, been answered with a tidal wave of it. Her simple, selfless act had reminded a brotherhood of forgotten warriors what their code truly meant: to stand as a shield for the defenseless, to be the thunder in the face of the storm. And for anyone watching, for anyone who has ever felt small and helpless, know this: heroism doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears leather, rides on 2 wheels, and answers the call when no one else will. If you believe in the power of brotherhood and standing up for the innocent, share this story. Let the world know that even in the darkest corners, angels are watching.